Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Council, Senior Editor of Forbes The Culture. I'm joined today by Stephani Page, who is Director of Strategic Initiatives at Women in Engineering Proactive Network, or WEPAN. She also created the BlackInStem hashtag in 2014 and now runs a namesake community for it as well. Today, we're going to be discussing STEM, jobs, and economic inclusion. Stephani, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here to talk about this very important topic.
Yes, great to have you. Tell us a little bit about WEPAN and your role there.
So WEPAN is an organization that will be 33 years old this year. It was started in 1990, initially by folks who led women in engineering programs. And so women in engineering programs are at higher education institutions. They are geared toward supporting women in engineering pathways from higher ed all the way through careers, because as we know, historically, women have been undervalued and underrepresented in engineering fields. And so for 33 years or so, WEPAN was a space that was just doing work all across the engineering ecosystem, from K-12 through policy, through higher education, as I mentioned, and also just thinking more broadly across STEM. And so I became a part of WEPAN 2 years in this February. And what we are also doing with the work around my team is really taking a look at historically how we've supported women engineers and how we really thought expansively, taking an intersectional view, thinking about not just women, but also women of color, disabled folks, people who are not necessarily identifying and expressing themselves within the gender binary, who also are navigating fields that are not just unwelcoming, but also inequitable in terms of how they experience opportunity in those spaces. So we're applying a social justice lens and thinking more deeply about how do we support people in making change as they are being successful in advancing in their careers. And then for those of us who think a lot about how to make change, we're trying to support and build community in that space too, so that we can share best practices, share models for change, and really think deeply and holistically about what does change really look like too.
Appreciate that context. Now, you created the BlackInStem hashtag almost 10 years ago now.
Yes.
What do you remember, what the world was sort of like at the time, and what's changed since then?
That's such a good question. My world was in a really interesting place at the time. I was actually working on my PhD in biochemistry and biophysics. I was at that time a mom of a child in grade school. I was in the middle of a blizzard in North Carolina. I was, navigating a lot of different things that I believe really contributed to my saying, here's my experience as a Black woman navigating a PhD program. Here's my experience coming out of my previous educational path. I got a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. I got a master's in biology. And so I had this experience where I was reflecting on both the good, the bad, the ugly. What were the things that really supported me in being successful? What were the ways in which people really held me up? What were the ways in which I experienced opportunity that I know other Black women like me didn't experience? There was just this space, like I was constantly reflecting on that. And I was literally thinking, I just want to find maybe 30, 40, 60 people maybe who are sort of in this space of reflection that I'm in. I just want to connect. I had this experience of understanding just how few women who look like me, have PhDs in biochemistry and biophysics. And I just wanted to think about how can we find each other. And so I started it just really leveraging the fact that I was stuck at home and leveraging the fact that my mind was just turning over all of these thoughts, all of these um, ideas were just coming into my mind. And so I was just like, well, let's just do something and let's just see what it turns out to be. And made this tweet, thought I was being really funny with a pun and saying, we're gonna have a roll call, and I spelled roll ROLE in some of the tweets. Some of it was ROLL, like a typical roll call, but it was like ROLE, where are you? What do you do? And it ended up trending. And what I really saw was that people really needed this. I mean, really, really, really needed this. Just a way to kind of feel connected and feel seen and heard and understood. A way to define who we are as folks, not just in STEM, but the fact that we are, based on our cultures and heritages, we are STEM minded. And so it was also like a space to claim and own and define our STEM identities. And so it kind of became a community just in terms of responding to just people having this desire to connect around the space. So it was one of those things where it's definitely timely for me, being at the stage of my doctoral program that I was, where you don't get a lot of gas in the tank and you feel like you're always running on E. It was just a wonderful, energizing experience to just connect with so many different people.
Yeah. Did you have, I know you said you were kind of looking for that broader community, but did you have one that was more local? Or really kind of by
Absolutely.
yourself? Okay, all right. All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. I mean, there's so much that BlackInStem models, really. And it's always important. Thank you for asking this question, because it's always important for me to acknowledge that, BlackInStem models, some of the community that I found marching in the band at ENT. It models the community of being in McNair Hall with all of these other engineering majors trying to get it through, make our mamas proud. It models the ability, or well, I will say it more so models the structure of this program that I was really, really fortunate to be a part of. And at the time, it had transitioned from being led by Patricia Phelps to being led by Shala Freeman, which was the Initiative for Maximizing Student Diversity program, the IMSD program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which was where I earned my PhD. They created this space for so many of the students who come from various marginalized groups to find each other, to support each other, to develop ourselves professionally more, to have opportunities that are typically not extended to us, to grow together. And so BlackInStem really was modeling those spaces. It was modeling, what I experienced. Just, you can go to your hometown, and you can go to your community center or your rec center. It really was modeling all these different spaces that I felt gave me the tools to navigate my educational path and my career.
Got you. As we remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this week, one of the messages that he emphasized was economic inclusion, and how the country could never really get to that promised land, without that being part of the equation. And so 55 years after his death, tell us why diversity in STEM matters as it relates to economic inclusion.
I think a lot about this, and I think what's important to say is that we've lost a lot of the meaning around diversity. Diversity isn't just about numbers. The word diversity connects really well to economic inclusion, because economic inclusion asks a question about our people experiencing and accessing resources and opportunity equitably. And so really diversity is supposed to ask that question. And it's supposed to look at the lack of a presence of certain folks as an indication of what we're not doing. and as an indication of a gap that we need to fill, and not just feel sort of performatively and without care, but with consideration for then what will a person experience once they are in the room and in the space, and they're able to, access the opportunity. When we think about STEM and what it means now, we hear it all the time. This is, we need STEM workers because we need these skilled folks to help stabilize our economy, help keep us a leader in the global economy, in the global sense of advancement and innovation. This has always been the language, and
High-paying
it comes out
jobs.
of, yes, yeah, and so then the question becomes, if STEM is so deeply tied to our overall economic standing as a country and then globally, how do we sort of think of STEM as being separate from economic inclusion? It's very much tied to it. And an example that I think about is the fact that for decades, I think for as long as the NSF has been collecting data on who's earning degrees where, right? Black women, for example, have only made up 2% of bachelor's degree earners in engineering. That means that we don't have access to the economic benefit of pursuing that degree, of pursuing our interests in being problem solvers in this way. And so I always reflect back to, what does that mean if Black women are still only 2%, but we still keep saying go get an engineering degree because at entry level, with average salary is around $70,000. Then there's also all of the networks that are built into engineering pathways. So all of the other information that you have that you're able to benefit from, we more broadly, we might call it financial security, but it's just the idea that access begets access. And so as long as in the context of STEM, we are still fighting this battle around ensuring not just equitable access to resources and opportunity, but equitable access to thriving and being supported and feeling a sense of belonging and having people reflect on you as being of value. We're not going to get there. It will always be just a very, very far off, as you said, promised land. And so I think a lot about that.
Yeah. Now, there have been quite a few studies recently suggesting that diversity in STEM outcomes might be stalling a little. A Pew study in 2021 found that there was no change in Black STEM workers since 2016. A 2019 study by educational researcher found that 40% of Black students switch out of STEM majors compared with less than 30% of white students. When you hear these things, and there may be other stats out there that signal this as well, when you hear all of this, what do you think?
I think that we do a poor job of recognizing that on a fundamental level, STEM is a pursuit of knowledge. And we've created this exclusivity around STEM that says, you've got to have a certain identity, you've got to have a certain socioeconomic status, and in order to navigate it. And then what's really, really interesting too that we do around STEM is we say, if you are interested, and we somehow bestow exceptionality upon you, right? Which is sometimes what we see happen with young Black children, for example, is like, oh, we're going to pluck you out because you're just so special, instead of taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, all Black children are special. How do we help them find their path? We exceptionalize. And then in that exceptionalizing, we ask for perfection. So if you have a misstep, maybe it means STEM isn't for you. Not that you had a misstep, maybe not that you might need extra support. Maybe that you, not that you learn from failing either, but that you've made a mistake, so this is not for you. And so we ask for perfection. We ask to not have any mistakes or missteps. We ask for those individuals to assimilate and change who they are in order to adapt to a quote unquote culture of STEM mindedness. And again, getting back to defining STEM identity, instead of STEM identity is imposed. And if what's imposed doesn't fit who you feel you are, then why would you stay in those paths? I think the other thing is we also have to look at how we just talk about STEM broadly. STEM to me should be an option. And if I am talking to kids, when I talk to kids about STEM, the big piece for me to say is, you don't waste my time if you don't choose to go and get a STEM degree or take STEM classes or become a STEM professional. I am helping you access another part of your curiosity. I'm helping you work out, whether or not maybe you're interested in pursuing this in a more structured and formal way, or maybe you just think it's really cool and you will always be a lifetime learner in the context of these topics and these disciplines. And so the other thing I think about how we talk about STEM that's impacting these numbers is it's a conflicting message to say, if you're in it, you got to be in it, and you gotta want a degree and a career path, but also it's not for you. And so we have to really begin to clarify what our messaging is, and we have to begin to clarify, what do we really want people to experience? And so you're talking about young Black kids and the fact that any child is going to come to a space with just a wide range of interests. Um, but a lot of their drive and their motivation is going to come from responding to what they feel are the problems and issues in the world. And if what they connect to as a means to address or a means to think about or problem solve is a non-STEM field, then they're almost treated as if they're not worthy of a continued investment. So I was just I'm like,
Sounds like
how do I want to say that, huh?
nah, that was beautiful. It almost sounds like if you're not all in, you don't belong here kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's like, imagine what the messaging is. I think a lot about it. For me, my personal story is, it was my fifth grade teacher, Miss Eckerd, who was huge, because my fourth grade teacher essentially told me I was nothing. And I came into my fifth grade teacher's classroom. Miss Eckerd loved on me. She loved on, I saw her love on other students, and like she created this environment for us. And then when I was in high school, it was my high school teacher, Mr. Ray, who saw that I was connecting with chemistry. And he just was like, I'm going to stay with you and I'm going to help you navigate this. And when I think about the fact that I have three brothers, that was not even the experience for all four of us. So then take that, when I take that to a larger space and I think about all Black kids everywhere, there's just so much that we're leaving to chance. We're leaving it to getting in that right teacher's classroom. We're leaving it to that person seeing something in us. And it really is, it's just, we're not being intentional. We're leaving it to chance. And then we're saying we're doing a good job when one becomes successful. And I'm like, in what way does one becoming successful mean we've achieved this great success in terms of advancing diversity and equity, right? Barack Obama becoming president does not mean that we have achieved racial equity. My becoming a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics does not mean that the field of biochemistry and biophysics has achieved equity. So, I think a lot about that. We leave so much to chance when we are talking about our children. And then we leave so much to chance when we're talking about change. You know, and in a lot of ways too, I feel like we rely on the marginalized folks that make it to also carry forward the change. So, and that's another, I mean, that could be a whole nother conversation in and of itself.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah.
I hear that. The last thing I want to ask you is what's at stake as a country if we don't get this right?
That's a heavy question for me. Because, you know, that young kid in grade school when I started BlackInStem is now entering the second half of high school. And, you know, what my concerns are as a mom have a lot to do with the what is it going to take for my son to survive? What is it going to take for him to survive? It was scary to see, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. It was really expensive to survive this pandemic, which hasn't ended, right? It was really, really expensive. When you think about the fact that the people who had to go to work, it wasn't just because they were essential workers, it was because for many of them, they did not have the resources to just stop working, to just go home until figured out how you would get people online together or figuring out how you would bring people in person together but keep them safe. They did not have access to resources to sit for however long it would take for them to be able to, you know, for whomever powers that be, decision makers, to be able to figure out how to keep their roles and their work moving forward just so that they could get paid, so that they could eat, so they could keep a roof over their heads and over their families' heads, so that they could take care of the people who they're responsible for taking care of. And so for me, what's at stake when we don't get this right is, you know, this is absolutely still about survival.
Okay.
It's still about just like the basic, you know, piece of survival. I think when we also talk about the quote unquote business case for diversity, which it is something that does frustrate me contextually, because yes, we know that we need workers in STEM fields to carry forward these many different enterprises. But at the same time, we're still commodifying people by saying that the only value and context that we assign, or that context of worth that we assign to diversity, is not equity. It's not what is truly justice. It's not what is truly going to empower people. It is, how do we continue to grow our economy? And oh, by the way, we know that we innovate more and we create better solutions when we have diverse teams. That to me still separates out the human value,
Mhm.
which is that one of the big things I think we're missing in STEM is also because we've distanced everything not STEM. That people who are, you know, supposed to be on these leading edges of innovation, of creating solutions, they have no awareness of the society that they are supposed to be helping. And that is so important. And I feel like we're going to continue down this road where people are actually detached from the human element. And that's a really big piece that's at stake when we think about not advancing diversity and justice in STEM. And when we think about not advancing economic inclusion, we don't, this isn't some closed system. These are all pieces that interact and engage with each other. And so, you know, I think we could see some really, we could see it get worse before we see it get better.
So as I mentioned to you when I reached out, Stephani,
Mm-hmm.
Chanda Prescott Weinstein, you know, referred me to you, and she has a bibliography or a database that she recently put out called,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Black women in physics. I think it's like Cite Black Women or something like that. And I want to get your take on, I know that's just for physics, but what is the significance of a list like that, that sort of showcases and highlights Black women who've earned PhDs in a field?
So much. I know we don't have much time, so I'll try to just enumerate a few things. I alluded to earlier sort of the issue with how we use diversity, for example. The term diversity has been detached from the marginalized peoples, the movements, the activism, the scholarship that really gave rise to diversity meaning something. And part of what we're seeing in the work, in sort of seeing, oh, we're not seeing the shifts, as you referred to some of the Pew data, we're not seeing the shifts that we should be seeing. It's because the words have lost the meaning that they originally had. And for me, when we say cite Black women, that it's directly tied to that fact that we are doing work to try to change this thing, and we have not even acknowledged where it comes from, which essentially means that we're also co-opting it, because if you're not acknowledging where it comes from, then you're co-opting it, period. It also means that we are not looking at our outcomes and determining our outcomes and our measures for success based on where the words come from. And it also means that we're losing the ethos. And so for me, what is so critical about these bibliographies is, first and foremost, it puts us in the position to discontinue that practice of co-opting ideas and work and terminologies, which we do a lot in this country. And it also puts us in the practice of saying for those behind us, thank you, and saying for those coming after us, thank you also. I always forget to go back and make sure that I'm getting the actual peoples correct, so I won't reference it, but Tiffany Smith, who is Director of Research for ACES, the American Indian Science Engineering Society, I've heard her give this talk in many different talks, but in one specific talk, she talks about the fact that there are peoples who have a tradition of thinking of the present as being something that we are borrowing from future generations. And so for me, when we keep these bibliographies and we say cite Black women, we say cite marginalized folk, we're also saying don't erase us from the future, don't erase us from being a future resource from the folks who we are borrowing this earth from right now.
All right, Stephani, thanks so much for the time today.